QSO Today, episode 354, Marty Woll N6VI. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by Icom America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you that field day is just around the corner. Get ready with a new Icom Ic 705 all-band portable transceiver now shipping from your favorite amateur radio dealer. And by LDG Electronics, whose desktop antenna tuners are perfect for your ham shack or mobile. More on this later. My thanks to Icom America and LDG Electronics for their support of the QSO Today podcast. A new way to support the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee by pressing on the yellow button on the QSO Today homepage. My thanks in advance for the coffee and your support of QSO Today. Just a reminder that speaker applications are open for the next QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo coming in August. If you have a presentation on a technology or project that you're working on and wish to share it with thousands of your ham radio buddies, go to the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo website and apply. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth4Z1UG, your host. Marty Woll N6VI has a wide range of amateur radio interests from HFCW contests and working DX to making 10 gigahertz microwave contacts from hilltops around Southern California. N6VI has always been active and on the air, leading his ham club or as an ARRL vice director. And he is my guest in this QSO Today. N6VI, this is Eric 4Z1UG. Are you there, Marty?
4Z1UG from N6VI. Good morning, Eric. Yes, I am.
Good evening, Marty. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, I think the seed was really planted many years before I had any idea what ham radio was. Our Boy Scout troop needed a signaling team for our field day. Boy Scouts have their own field day competition. And that's where you send Morse code using a flag dipped to the right and left for dits and dahs. And my dad was not a ham, but he learned the code and then taught me the code so I could become the receiver on our signaling team. And we went on to win most of our competitions. Now, some years fast forward, I met several hams in high school and they wanted to get me interested. And I realized I didn't have to start from scratch. I could kind of revive my modest CW abilities. And then one of my close friends was a self-taught electronics experimenter and builder in high school. So I helped him with the code, he helped me with the theory, and we both got licensed.
What was the hometown?
Oh, I was in Granada Hills at the time in the north end of the San Fernando Valley.
And that's Southern California?
Yes, that's Southern California.
So you're a Valley boy?
Absolutely, yeah, I'm a native.
Okay, so you went to Granada Hills High School?
No, I went to Alemany High School. It's a parochial school in Mission Hills.
And did they have an amateur radio club?
No, they didn't, but there were several of us who were interested. So that school had a lot of things going for it, but there was really no hands-on technology type stuff.
This was probably, the late 60s?
Yes.
You say you had some friends in high school who kind of got you interested. How did they get you interested? What was it that they were doing that attracted you?
Well, my friend Thad, WV6UJY, who was not a ham yet, but was always building stuff and trying things out. And I would go over to his place and we'd try things together and put something together and see if it worked. And then a couple of other friends said, hey, let's get our licenses because they'd heard about ham radio. I'd seen a station once or twice, a modest station. But for me, I'd always been reading as a kid about, electricity and math and so on. And not that I ever became a whiz at any of them, but I was just interested in how you get things to work, how things are built. Probably my first foray into that was taking apart my parents' first phonograph. And of course, it never went back together, but I got to see how all the parts fit together in there.
I think in those days in the Valley, there actually were a lot of ham radio operators. Did you find a ham radio club as a teenager that you and your friends might have gone to in order to kind of reinforce the interest?
Actually, yeah. And if I guess that kind of goes into the story of, who kind of nurtured me. We didn't really have any adult Elmers at the time, but one evening I was sitting listening on an AM broadcast radio and I heard CW coming over it. And I copied the call and discovered Lee Jones, WB6OLD, now he's KR6X. So I looked him up and he introduced me to the West Valley Amateur Radio Club, which is a club of and not to be confused with the one in Arizona. This was the West San Fernando Valley. And it was a club of all kids. There were no adults. They were very big into field day and actually won the 4A category nationally 5 times. So I learned a lot from the other members about station building, antenna installation, crisp operating. I mean, we even made up our own custom log sheets for field day with the sent and receive columns reversed so that the pencil didn't have to travel so far when you're logging the contact.
Well, that's pretty crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Now, how was it possible that the West Valley Amateur Radio Club was just young people and didn't have any old people in it?
It was that way when I joined, and it pretty much stayed that way until I guess we got old enough that we became adults ourselves and went our various ways. So many of the guys there succeeded in amateur radio. By succeeded, I mean they stayed in it, they enjoyed it. You know, one of the guys, Ken Beals, WB6VFJ, now he's K6MR, he did tower work with a guy named Ted Gillette, W6HX, and he shared what he learned about installing towers and antennas and climbing. So to this day, you know, over 50 years later, I still like to climb. But that club, I think, was one of the best starts a kid could get in ham radio. Some of its members appeared in the Dave Bell W6AQ original Ham's Wide World promotion video. Some of them went on to join the CQ Contest Hall of Fame, like Tree, WB6ZVC, now N6TR, Bob Wilson, and a WN6TLV, our secret weapon in field day, 45 word a minute novice, now N6TV. You know, being around those guys, you couldn't help but be enthusiastic about radio.
Well, Tree was my guest, I think, 2 episodes ago.
Oh, very good.
It all comes from the Valley. Well, you know, the Valley was famous for its surplus electronics because of the aerospace industry there. Did you take advantage as a kid of any of the opportunities for surplus radios?
Not surplus radios, but parts, yes. Place called Apex Electronics, somewhere you never want to be in an earthquake because of the heavy stuff, the heavy iron piled high way over your head. And it's still there, by the way. So we used to go there periodically and scrounge the racks for parts that we needed to build things. And that was probably the best single source that we had locally.
Did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
You know, not really. When I considered engineering when I was going into college, but I found a lot of engineers at that time who were going back to school for MBAs because their job market was kind of soft. So instead, I became a CPA where the demand was high. But I was involved with the UCLA Radio Club, the W6YRA, Young Radio Amateurs, all through college.
Well, it seems to me that you were the president.
Eventually, I served as its president, and I worked with a couple of friends I made there to build that station up into something that was pretty competitive for the day.
And what was competitive for the day? What kind of radios then?
Well, I mean, when I got there, I think it was an NCX3 and an HRO 500 and a TA33 Junior that wasn't even above the roof. So we got some tower section up there on the very top of Bolter Hall. I put up a 4-element quad and a 2-element 40. I strung dipoles for 80 and even 160 across the diagonal of Bolter Hall. Got a Drake line. I had been working part-time at Henry Radio until I graduated, and as was one of our other members. And Ted Henry provided us a nice homemade amplifier that he had in his closet that he wasn't going to use anymore. You know, we had a Drake line and a kilowatt and antennas on 6 bands, so that got us pretty far. The only problem was it was a concrete building, and it sounded like we were operating inside a barrel.
That often happens, especially, I guess, with the microphones that were being used in those days. I realize that I just skipped over what your first rig was, and I actually have listeners that send me messages and say, hey, don't forget about the first rig and also the first antenna. What was your first rig?
Oh, okay. Well, I started with a Heath DX60 transmitter and a Hallicrafters SX111 receiver, and then a 40-15-meter inverted V. That was the start. As soon as I got my General, then I bought and built a Heath SB301-401 combination to get on sideband.
And how supportive were your parents when it came to ham radio and putting antennas on the house?
Well, I mean, very much. In fact, long before I moved out, I graduated from the inverted V to a Tristeo tower. I mean, we dug a hole, poured the concrete. We put up a rotator and a 3-element or a 4-element quad 2-element 40-meter shorty beam. They were fine with that. I reminded them that a lot of their friends had kids who were out getting in trouble. I was there at home not getting in trouble.
Well, that was my story, too. They always knew where I was.
It works.
Except for Southern California transmitter hunting, when your parents had no idea where you were all night. That's a different story. So let me ask you, you decided not to become an engineer, and I guess I understand the time, because at the time probably you were in college, there was a big recession after the landing on the moon.
Yeah.
The whole space industry kind of collapsed after that. So what did you do from there professionally?
Well, I was an econ major at UCLA and spent my last couple of years in the Graduate School of Management, even though back then they hadn't figured out that when an undergrad takes graduate school classes, there's no transfer of tuition, so they didn't object at the time. Now that's difficult to do. But then that's where I saw these engineers coming back for MBAs. So I took a lot of accounting, business law, all that sort of stuff, and took the CPA exam before I graduated, and then went to work for a major international firm, and that was pretty much my career.
And at the same time, you were always active in amateur radio.
Pretty much the whole time, yes. It never really left. There were times, of course, when I was working too much to do the kinds of all-nighters on 20 meters that I used to be able to do in school. But it never really left me, and there was the occasional need for somebody with a little bit of technical knowledge to talk to some of the then high-tech clients. So at least I knew some of what they were doing. But no, I stayed involved and active, and I got involved in the Southern California DX Club, and I became the president of that, and met some really cool folks, people who were very knowledgeable. Guys like Dick Norton, N6VI, who was W6DGH back then, and had just taken I think five years straight being the top single op CQ worldwide phone in CW, and then while I was still working, I got to we planned our vacations for usually late fall, because most of my partners and other coworkers were taking their vacations in the summer. So I kind of covered for them, and then they covered for me in the fall when CQ Worldwide was going on, and we got to start going on some DXpeditions, which we can talk about a little later. But I got a chance to operate with some great guys there.
What's the difference between a DX club and a regular ham radio club?
Well, for one thing, the focus, it tends to draw people who are more interested perhaps in station building and performance and understanding propagation. I mean, we used to hear Dale Hoppy, then W6VSS, talk about gray line propagation and describe how that worked. That's not the thing you used to see in the general interest club. Some of those have broadened out quite a bit, but the general interest clubs, they may have a modest public service focus. It may be, some people refer to Romeo clubs, standing for Retired Old Men Eating Out. Most of the clubs I had a chance to visit while I was ARL vice director for the Southwestern Division were a lot better than that. They had building projects, and they had, of course, field days and so on. But the DX Club was, again, much more focused. You didn't have non-DX topics really discussed or presented at the meetings. Also, you tended to have the occasional visitor from out of town. They would try to visiting ham, would usually look up the DX Club meeting and come, and you get a chance to meet some of those folks in person.
And now this message from Icom America. Field Day is just around the corner, June 26th and June 27th. Icom has the Field Day base station of your dreams with the Icom IC 7300 HF and the Icom IC 9700 VHF UHF SDR transceivers, and the new portable all-band SDR transceiver, the Icom IC 705. These top-of-the-line transceivers are the choice of DXers and contesters across the globe because they cut through pileups, letting you work all the bands and record those contacts. Icom radios will make you the field day leader. Hear it, worked it, logged it. The Icom IC 7300 is a high-performance, innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed your expectations. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages to reduce the generated inherent noise in different IF stages. The IC7300 is the radio that changed the way the entry-level HF is designed. I myself have the IC7300, and I love it. It has RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD card memory slot. The real fun of HF starts here. Create your own band opening with the Icom IC9700. This transceiver brings direct sampling to the UHF-VHF weak signal world. This all-band transceiver is loaded with innovative features that are sure to keep you busy. A 4.3 touchscreen color TFT LCD with real-time high-speed spectrum scope and waterfall display. Smooth satellite operation with 99 satellite channels. Dual watch operation and full duplex operation in satellite mode. Expect top performance on field day with the Icom's IC9700. Finally, the Icom IC705 is the perfect transceiver for hams who enjoy both the great outdoors and indoors on field day. It's the perfect QRP companion. This base station has features and functionality at the tip of your fingers in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. It weighs in under 2 pounds. It also has a 4.3-inch touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall display, 5 watts with the BP272 battery pack, and 10 watts if you hook it up to 13.8 volts DC. Single sideband CW, AM, and FM, as well as full D-Star functions. Micro USB connector, Bluetooth, wireless LAN, and the micro SD card slot. Integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger. The HM243 speaker microphone comes standard equipment. The perfect accessory for the IC705 is the optional backpack, the LC192, with its special compartment for your IC705 and room for accessories for soda activations, contesting, or a day in the park, maybe not social distancing. Of course, you can find out more information about these amazing Icom transceivers by visiting Icom America's website at www.icomamerica.com/amateur or by visiting one of Icom's dealers near you. And when you go to buy your new Icom transceiver, tell your dealer that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. So at that time, at least at the very beginning, you were very active in chasing DX and operating contests. What's your favorite operating mode in those cases?
Well, I mean, I really enjoy CW, but I split my time between CW contests and phone contests. With the modest station I have here at home now, CW is a lot more effective. But I'm on phone a lot. For one thing, it's kind of the common denominator for most of the hams in the MCOM world, where I have lots and lots of involvement.
We'll be sure to talk about that as well. What is the current rig?
Right now, I've got an Elecraft K3 as the main rig. That's got quite a few airline miles on it, as did its predecessor, which was a Kenwood TS930 that I'd loaded up with Fox Tango filters for phone and CW. As far as amps, my longtime amp was an Alpha 78. Still have it. But it got to the point where that no longer met the baggage limits when we were going on an expedition. So I got an Expert Linear 1.3K, which is only about 25 pounds, and it's much more portable. The antennas, pretty much low dipoles, which is a far cry from the 6 towers and 15 Yagis I had when I was living on the North Shore of Oahu back in the 90s. For VHF and UHF, I have an assortment of FM rigs, several of the old Icom single-band, single-mode transceivers, and a few beams that I just stick out on the porch, and a couple of verticals. Nothing super impressive.
When I see the pictures, it seems impressive. Now, when we were exchanging emails today, you said that you actually had to hike up the hill to the ham shack. What's the arrangement that you have there in the valley?
The house is on just about an acre, and the house is down near the street. And then the property slopes up. There's a backyard. The property slopes up to a pad up top where the original owners had built a guest house, about 600-700 square feet. I decided that would be a good place for the station, just to kind of get away from everybody a little bit. So there's a guest house up there, and one of the rooms is the station.
the top of that hill with the pad, does that give you some kind of view of the area?
It does going south, and that has been really helpful, particularly with the MCOM type work and some of the VHF. I can work directly down into the LA Basin, over the Santa Monica Mountains. I can work down to LAX and even down to San Diego on occasion. Going to the north, however, I'm right at the foot of Oat Mountain, so my shot to the north is pretty well blocked.
It seems to me that you were a really active HFer, and then you kind of made this transition to VHF, UHF, and microwave. How did that happen?
Well, rather than a transition, I'd say it was an addition, because I've never stopped with the HF. Probably my earliest mentor in VHF was Wayne Overbeck, N6NB. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to interview.
I know who he is, for sure.
Wayne, I've known for back when he was K6YNB. And he got me into mountain topping and then later into roving and building microwave stations. So, you know, a little taste of that. And it was a different kind of contest, but it was still contesting, and it was still a challenge to make things work and figure out how to make the work better. You know, I got some good guidance from guys like Chip N6CA. And then many years later, I joined the San Bernardino Microwave Society and found myself just surrounded by all these really smart folks. And we mentioned Robin WA6CDR earlier, and Dennis W6DQ and W6DL, and just all these great folks, WA76JBD. And they all share so much of their information, and we'd go roving together and do mountain topping and so on. So I've met all these great folks who keep me really stoked up about trying something new in VHF. So it's never been a transition. It's always just been adding to the toolbox, if you will.
Oftentimes I'll get a message from a new ham that started listening to the podcast, and he'll say, I just got my technician license. I bought a Chinese portable, and there's nobody to talk to on the repeaters. How would you influence a new technician licensee to the greater world of VHF and UHF that they have full privileges on, but may not know about and may not understand?
Well, the first job is to try and connect with them. And one of the things my wife does is she's an official relay station with the National Traffic System and gets a lot of the welcome to ham radio messages. And when she delivers them, she tries to find out what they're interested in and steer them towards some of the simplex nets that are around and to Aries and other groups. So, once you have some regular contact with them, then you can start setting up opportunities for them to sample the greater world of VHF and even HF eventually. For example, in our Aries activities here in Los Angeles, we will usually, in addition to the usual repeater nets, we'll conduct simplex nets so they can start to see how far they can reach without using a repeater, and thereby gauge the performance of their station and then make incremental improvements, which we try to help them with. I've done webinars on building up a capable station for guided, focused primarily on technicians. We've gone over and helped people put antennas up. I've talked about the coax and the losses in coax, and try to make sure that they can have a station that works. It's got to be really frustrating to have what you think, hey, I've got my little handheld. Why aren't I talking to everybody? And they don't yet have the perspective of what it means to be able to talk all around the Southern California versus what it means to be able to talk a few blocks. As far as nobody to talk to on a repeater, I mean, Southern California is just jam-packed full of repeaters to the point where a lot of channel pairs are co-channel like 4 ways. And yet the activity on many of them seems to have waned over the last probably 10 or 20 years. Originally, when repeaters were going up, they had auto patch and so on, because there really weren't too many alternatives to being able to make a phone call from your car. Now, of course, everybody has those alternatives. So I don't know that the repeater is necessarily the best or only way for a new person to make some contacts. I would encourage them to get enough of a station, even, drive up to a hill, do something that will give you a little more distance, and then practice with it.
Are the ham radio clubs in Southern California, most notably the Valley, because that's where you're at, are those clubs still active?
There are a few. The San Fernando Valley Radio Club was very active when I was a kid. I did not join it, but because I was involved with the West Valley Amateur Radio Club. In fact, we used to have field days on adjacent hills, and one of my friends brought a telescope, and we'd be looking at them, seeing what they were doing, and then we committed to beat them. So, I mean, they were there. They had their field day was largely a social event, and, with some radio operating. Ours was kind of laser focused. I mean, if you imagine, a hot summer day on a mountaintop with a bunch of teenage boys, and there's no beer, because we weren't there. We didn't want anything to distract from what we were doing. So, but yes, that club is still going. Obviously, leadership changes over time, and the focus changes over time. I've given some presentations there. I've heard some other good presentations there. So, and also, people tend to travel a little more to clubs that are not necessarily geographically in their backyard, but they're within maybe an hour or so travel. And so you'll find people going to clubs a little further afield than just right local.
Has the COVID-19 pandemic increased club activity due to Zoom or things like that? Has it revised clubs?
A few clubs were very late to take that up, and I think probably suffered as a result. Most of them found a way to get online and conduct meetings that way. And frankly, it has both expanded the attendance at some of these meetings and also expanded the reach in terms of getting speakers I did hundreds of talks over the course of my vice director tenure and beyond. And most of it meant driving, and often it was driving a couple of hours to get through commuter traffic to get to a place for a 7 p.m. meeting. Now I can easily talk to folks down in San Diego or wherever without having to drive those several hours. So I frankly see that this has opened a door that nobody's going to want to really slam shut when everybody gets back to where they can have in-person meetings. There may be some hybrid meetings, but you want to be inclusive. The San Bernardino Microwave Society, that was a tough one for me because it's a 90 plus mile commute each way, and through some really heavy traffic, I'd usually have to leave the house about 2 p.m. But since they've been doing their meetings on actually a combination of ATV, YouTube, and link to YouTube, and also the Cactus system, are some of our members who have moved out of the immediate area, like Pat and 6RMJ and others who are in Arizona, have been able to participate just as fully as the rest of us. So I don't really see that going away. So hopefully that's a good thing that comes out of the shutdowns.
As you were sending me photos, you sent me a great picture of the ultimate SUV covered with VHF and UHF Yagis for roving. What is roving? Can you explain a little bit about it? And what's the goal?
Okay, the roving generally is done in the context of a VHF, UHF, or microwave contest. And in those contests, you are generally allowed to work somebody only once, unless one of you moves a certain distance. In some contests, you have to go to a new grid square. In others, like the microwave contest, you have to move at least 10 miles. So you can choose to either, sit at home and operate fixed there, or you can sit on a mountaintop and operate from there, which is a lot of fun. Or you can rove, and what you're doing is you're going to say, okay, if I can operate, let's say in a typical, say ARRL VHF, June, September, January, I can go work everybody from a given spot in Delta Mike 04, and then I can go up to Delta Mike 05, and I can work everybody I can reach again, and then I can go somewhere else. So I don't think this originated in Southern California, but Wayne N6NB probably perfected it by having multiple stations he would outfit. And that I started out using one of his loaners, and eventually I built my own 10-band system. It's 6 meters through 10 gigahertz. And we would go around from one spot to another. And if you're on a mountaintop, by the way, that's wonderful because you get the new multiplier, the grid multiplier on each band every time you work these folks, as well as the contact points. So I would work a group of rovers. Maybe they started down in San Diego, and I'd be working them in DM12, and then they'd work their way up, and then up into the San Joaquin Valley, and I get DMO6 and 7 and CM95 and CM96. So it was a way to build score. For those of us on the West Coast, if you ever watch the tropo maps, you'll see that what we have over land is generally pretty poor. There's sometimes a little bit along the coast, but it's generally pretty poor compared to the East Coast, where this big cloud of propagation lands over everybody, and they talk up and down the coast. We don't get that, so we had to make our own fun. And otherwise, what's the point of getting in the contest if you can't make a bunch of contacts? So the way we did that was to encourage roving, and that has become a major part of what certainly the Southern California Contest Club did, because it was very different from what most people were used to in radio. And so it was something new and exciting, and we drew in a lot of people. They drew me in on this, and what a blast.
So do you take the fire roads on the ridges, like in the Angeles National Forest, and then go from grid square to grid square and make contacts that way? Do you take advantage of the mountains? Yeah,
generally we try not to take a road that takes you 2 hours to get up and down, because if you're roving, part of the benefit to both your score and the score of the fixed stations is to hit as many of those spots as you can and work efficiently. So you don't want to take half the day getting up and down to one spot. So we try to stay just off the highways. Several of the folks who have roved for quite a while are really expert at knowing where a spot is. You could just pull off this off-ramp, go up this little road, and all of a sudden you're in that grid square. You're in a good spot. The microwave guys in particular are really good at that. The 50 and up club up in Northern California, and the SBMS down in Southern California. So, and then they share these spots. How can you get there? Where do you go? But it's not the long treks up a mountain, just because if you're roving, you don't have time for that.
Let me take a quick break to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, and that's the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Jeremy, KF7IJZ, and it now includes Michael Walker, VA3MW, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. The group documents their projects and makes circuit boards available to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Jeremy may complain about the overall length of the podcast, but friends, let me tell you that I could listen to it all day, and that's good. Even if you are a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George, Jeremy, and Mike now for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast on every podcast player. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO Today. Now you say you're operating 10 bands. Which 10 bands are you operating?
6 meters, 2 meters, 220, 432, 902, 1296, 2 gig, 3 gig, 5 gig, 10 gig, and then some have added 24 gigs, and in the microwave contest, they've gone way up above that.
Anybody operating 122?
Yes. There are some guys both in Southern and Northern Cal who are on that band. They're
using the little radar sensors from the back of cars, right?
They're using some custom chips that are out there. I'm not the expert in those. 24 gigs you can get transverters and LOs and so on to build that up. But as you get moving up, you have to become more creative. As I say, I know that there's some articles on the 50 and up website about how they built up their 47 gigahertz. In fact, I think the guys up there set a distance record on that band.
Now, you sent me a picture of a Zero Halliburton aluminum suitcase that had a bunch of boards in it. I'm going to put that into the show notes since you sent it to me. But what is that device that you built, and how do you use it?
That's basically a rooftop transverter box. As you know, the higher you go up in frequency, the more loss there is in coax cable. So even though I may have the lower bands down in the cab with me, when you get up, say 2 gig and higher, you really want to keep those losses down. So what I put together was a lightweight box that could go on the rotator on the roof of the vehicle. I have a custom rack that I made up to hold a Yaesu G1000 rotator. And then that would sit up there with the appropriate antennas on the H-frame. So just running from the box to the antennas was a very short run of just a few feet. So that kept the losses down. And then inside the box were identical blades, if you will, each one with one band, 10 in the front, 2 in the back. Some relays to switch the IF, which was 2 meters, and to switch the 10 gigahertz reference oscillator, which is just a rubidium box that I had down in the truck. Switch that to the active, whichever transverter was going to be active at the time, and then it switches the push to talk also. So I basically had a switch downstairs I clicked 2, 3, 5, 10, and I jumped from band to band, and you can make band changes extremely quickly that way.
And what do you use for a baseband rig in the car?
I have an FT857 Yaesu, and we just turn it down to 5 watts, which is its minimum. Have the transverter set so that they accept the 5 watts.
And that's all you need when you're doing this roving. Are you coordinating on Cactus, Intertie, or some other repeaters or something like that so that you can talk to guys and tell them that you're now in a new location and pointed?
In the VHF contests, we're mostly using 220 for 220 FM for liaison with other stations. 220 it really is an excellent band for that sort of thing. When it comes down to the microwave contest, where you're only on the higher bands, then yes, the Cactus system has been very good about letting the microwave contesters use it. I am a member of Cactus and joined just because they were so good about it, and that's been a good experience in itself. But frankly, with some of the X-band radios everybody has, there are no VHF radios that could possibly reach far enough for liaison. I mean, when Robin's sitting on, one of the peaks up in Nevada, whether it's Highland Peak or Potosi or what have you, if you didn't have something like the Cactus system, you couldn't reach him, you couldn't coordinate. And with microwaves, because of the gain of the antennas, you have to kind of point and line up and make sure you've got enough signal, and then you kill the liaison side and you work strictly on the operating band until you're done.
So if you're operating like on 10 gigahertz, for example, what kind of path can you cut from Southern California? Can you actually get to Nevada?
Oh, yes. From Fraser Peak with 2 watts and a 2-foot dish, I have 19 grid squares worked, going out to Arizona, to several grid squares in Nevada, up into Central and Northern California, all the way up as far as Mount Shasta.
Does that surprise you?
No, because I've seen what other guys can do, and usually mine's one of the smaller stations, both in terms of antenna and power. But the nice part is I don't have to spend an hour setting it up, and especially if you're roving, you don't want to be dragging stuff out of the vehicle, setting it up in the hot sun, and then packing it all up again. I just basically pull up, grab my Sunto compass, make sure that the vehicle is lined up north-south, and that means the indicator on the rotator is fairly accurate, and point and start calling.
I saw a YouTube video where you advocate the use of FRS and GMRS radios for emergency. Why would you advocate out-of-band radios for communications by the civilians?
Well, I'll tell you, that talk and similar ones I've given to CERT groups and neighborhood watch groups, it's specifically for non-hams. I usually talk to them about amateur radio and what it can do, but frankly, a lot of people aren't interested in getting a license and going through the work for it. And part of my role as somebody involved in communications is to make it easier for other people to communicate on their own. If I can be their mentor, if I can help them out, and having a license-free radio to at least talk around your apartment complex or your office or your your couple of blocks of neighborhood. That's the easiest way to get them on the air. They don't have to really sweat, licensing and fees and exams or anything else. Then we encourage the GMRS for whatever their base station is going to be, just so that because they can use a higher, better, more efficient antenna. The FCC rules are such that you basically can't do anything except take the handheld and plug it in, stick the battery in it and talk. You can't unscrew the antenna and put on a better one. So the GMRS kind of fills that role, if you will, for a base station at an event or within a neighborhood, so that it allows handhelds to communicate to that base station more effectively. And again, it's something that we've had lots of exercises where we'll go to a big community CERT meeting, give a presentation for a while, then we'll hand out some loaner radios, and they'll have scenarios set up around the inside and outside of the building, and we actually put people into teams and get them practicing this stuff. Almost any disaster, any issue, communications always comes up as a problem. And a lot of people don't think about it until they need it, and then they don't have it. So the more we can get them used to using radios and teach them the proper protocols and so on, so they use it effectively, the better off they're going to be when they're trying to just help one another.
Well, I think that we somehow think that our portable cell phones, I guess they're more than cell phones now, but the phones that we carry everywhere, that those will just keep working. I've been in a situation here in Israel where if we have a disaster or a bombing or something like that, there's no cell phones that work because they're being used only for emergency services. So when I saw the video of using FRS, it actually kind of rang a bell that this is actually a very good idea for neighborhoods to be able to keep in touch with each other when the cell phones go down. And they do go down, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's kind of the people's radio, if you will. And again, by teaching them a little bit about protocol and getting them to practice and use it once in a while with some nets or something, that's the sort of thing that will make it a go-to tool for them when they need it. And yeah, the cell phones are amazing in terms of their capabilities, but they are not immune from issues. For one thing, there's just a capacity issue. You try and use your cell phone when you're coming out of a Dodger Stadium after a game. The towers can only handle so many calls at once. Also, they all eventually move into the public switch telephone network. So you have both the vulnerabilities of the tower and the system itself, and then any vulnerabilities in the PTSN. Also, most cell towers do not have more than a few hours of battery backup. So anything extended, a fire, for example, that prevents people from getting up there and fixing something, that's going to bring that down as soon as it runs out of power.
We found out, I guess, on the East Coast that when you have electric power shortage that runs up and down the East Coast, then you actually can't pump gas into trucks to take to cell sites to run generators. So it's kind of like the whole system is kind of like cards that are falling over.
Yeah, most of our infrastructure is dependent on other infrastructure, and that's where hams have the opportunity to create stations that can operate independent of that infrastructure. You mentioned the East Coast. Down in Texas during the big freeze they had last winter, even if they had power, which most of them didn't, the ice on the roads was such that the gasoline trucks could not safely get to their stations to refill the tanks. So and the propane delivery trucks couldn't safely get to their customers to refill their propane tanks. So even that is a vulnerability.
As a person who's very active now in EMCOM, how busy are you in Southern California? Obviously, when things happen in Southern California, it makes the news worldwide, like some of these amazing fires, like the Malibu fire that you had a couple of years ago. How busy are you as a EMCOM person these days?
Busy, but not in a response fashion for the most part. The kinds of events that hit us tend to be less frequent, and the main thing is they're unpredictable. On the East Coast, when a hurricane's coming, when a snowstorm's coming, when it's going to thaw and the flood's coming. Here, we get very little, if any, warning on any of this. The main reason we would be activated would be if normal communications, that is, both the public infrastructure and the public safety infrastructure, went down. For the most part, that hasn't happened. It did once back, probably over a decade ago now. It's called the Sayre Fire, and it burned up in the Solmar area, right across Olive View Medical Center, and unfortunately cost homes and lives in a mobile home park near there. That's one where I got the call at 3 a.m. to go up there and reestablish communications between the hospital and the Medical Alert Center, which is a county Department of Health Services facility down in Santa Fe Springs. They basically dispatch the non-city rescues to the various hospitals, but that means they need to know what the hospital's intake capacity is, and that was all down. They couldn't talk to them, so we actually got through the fire lines in the middle of the night and reestablished comms using what we brought with us. But that's fairly unusual. Most of the time, during, say, the big fires in Woolsey Fire and so on, the public service folks, the Ventura County Fire, LA County Fire, LA City Fire, they have their comms working, and they haven't really lost it, so they don't need help. There's never been a time when the public service folks have needed our help in terms of, fire, law enforcement, things like that. They have quite a few backup systems. So one of the challenges in EMCOM here is to keep people, interested and ready, even though the likelihood that we're going to be called out is fairly low.
And now this message from LDG Electronics. LDG Electronics, our new sponsor, is a family-owned company that manufactures sophisticated antenna tuners, balun, and antenna accessories. Check out their new Z100A antenna tuner for your shack or portable operation that includes LDG's famous 10-to-1 tuning and plug-and-play operation. For more information, click on the banner in this week's show notes page. And when you make your LDG purchase, tell them that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. Well, I know that at least in Orange County, there's a very extensive use of amateur radio operators by the hospital systems down there. Is that true up in the Los Angeles area and in the Valley? And are hospitals taking advantages of amateur radio operators and systems like Arden and other high broadband amateur radio networks that perhaps could actually provide those emergency services?
Well, the Orange County system was, I think, much more heavily developed than it was up in L.A., and they were taking care of individual hospitals. For example, when a backhoe would dig through a cable and all of a sudden they lost their phones. April Mell, WA6OPS, started that, and that kind of fell by the wayside after she retired, but then it started up again with a group called HART, OC HART. And I'm not familiar with the details of their operation, but compared with Los Angeles, I would say the Orange County hospitals grew to become much more dependent on the hams. Most of the Valley hospitals I'm aware of and the LA hospitals have not been dependent on them except for longer distance communication with the MAC. We've had California emergency medical drills where so many hospitals are trying to use the ReadyNet system all at once that it crashes, and then our ARES group, we're the ones that we train to move that hospital status information, mass casualty information directly to the MAC. So we're getting it to the MAC like an hour before the system did. By the way, the ReadyNet system is really internet-based, again, showing the fragility of that. The original ReadyNet system was all RF, and it was actually designed and built by my friend Thad, WB6UJY, the one that helped teach me theory in high school. He designed that whole thing. I told you he was a builder. And, with RF, they didn't have to worry about that kind of system crashing. Now they do.
Do you think that hams are advocating enough for easing restrictions on antenna and HOAs?
Well, boy, we try. I've been involved in that, certainly from the ARRL standpoint and subsequently. The problem is you're never going to have enough influence, I think, in the legislature to overcome the influence of builder developers who have a lot of money at stake and therefore a lot of money to spend. I know the good folks in Arizona, amateur radios, have year after year had a bill that would have provided relief for folks in HOAs just because so many homes there were built with HOAs attached. And they had a governor ready to sign it. They'd get it through one house, and then they'd get one senator to block it and, talk it to death or amend it to death so that it wouldn't get passed. And they made huge strides and huge efforts and never happened. To me, I don't know that we're ever going to be able to overcome that by forcing it on people. But I've seen some real success stories with making it attractive enough. In other words, you have to get people to see amateur radio as an asset, not as a liability. And there have been some HOAs where some hams there started small. They said, hey, do we have an emergency preparedness committee or some sort, something to deal with emergencies? Because here we are, 800 homes and thousands of people living here. We may be at the end of the line in terms of getting services from the official responders. And so they get a kind of a community safety thing going on. And eventually you work in the subject of communications and they say, oh yeah, that would be a problem. And then as you educate them and you become part of their cadre of preparedness experts, then you introduce radio. And there are some good-sized HOAs and retirement communities that have gone to the point of putting up stations in their clubhouse for both backup communications and also for the hams that live there to enjoy and use. So it's not a matter of lobbying until you force them into submission. It's a matter of showing the benefits of it and selling it to them and getting them to realize that they, who are in charge of the rules, can change the rules to benefit themselves.
Can you blame hams that move into HOAs for just not thinking about it at the time they moved in, or is it because there's lack of choice in terms of where people can live these days?
I really don't blame them generally. It's almost impossible to find anything built in the last 30 or 40 years in Southern California in the way of tracts is subject to some sort of deed restrictions, whether it's by an HOA or it's just deed restrictions put in by the builder and then left there. And you can't blame them if they want, especially if they're getting older, they want to live near their kids. If they're near good medical care, if they're younger, they want to live near good schools. And you could buy a place out in the country on an acre or two and put up what you want, but now you're not going to be close to the family, to the medical care, to the food supply, to the schools, or to your job, whatever it may be. People say, well, they by buying it, they signed a contract. Well, no, they really didn't. I mean, a contract is negotiated two-way. There's no negotiation. It's there, and you either buy it or you don't. And also you get people who, a lot of hams become licensed after they've been married, they're in their house, and they didn't even think about it when they got the house because it wasn't an issue. Then they become a ham and realize that they're kind of constrained by these rules that they didn't know about or hadn't paid attention to. And if you're a kid being licensed, you don't have a choice where you live. You live where your parents live, and if they're in a place that has restrictions, you're stuck.
With your knowledge now and your expertise in VHF, UHF, and microwave, would you recommend to a new ham, even a teenage kid, that they pursue operating in these bands because the antennas are smaller?
Well, sure, it's a good way to get on the air, but I would also suggest that they consider doing some portable work. You look at the SOTA folks, the Summits on the Air. I mean, they have minimal stuff, whatever they can carry on their back, typically, and hike up to a high spot and get on, typically on HF. Someone will bring VHF as well and talk on handhelds. I've done that. I mean, I've been up on Fraser Peak with a handheld talking down to Long Beach and beyond. But so that's one option. But they bring buddy poles and fold up dipoles and whatever, and they just put it out low power and get on and start working people. I mean, you realize if you make a good band choice and you have a decent antenna, you don't need a kilowatt to be able to make contacts. That most of these folks are running very low power, in the 5-watt range. So that's, I think we can learn from them how to quickly set up a station on a portable basis, or even in your own home, set up something portable. I mean, and often antennas being restricted, it means you can't put something up permanently. But what if you have something you can set up, for a weekend, with a couple of tripods or masts, or, string something from a tree, and then at the end of the weekend, take it down. There are options out there, and you ought to explore as many of them as you can.
Well, it seems to me that somebody that could come up with a magnetic loop patio table and umbrella might have something there. I just finished a CW Academy class, and a number of the guys in the class operate in parks because the noise level in their neighborhood is so high that if they go out to a park, they actually have a nice way to operate parks on the air, or operate in a park where the noise floor is quiet.
Noise is a huge issue. You mentioned the patio table loop. I think I've seen an article on one of those in QST sometime back. So yes, that's very possible. As far as noise level, that's become a real problem in most urban areas. More and more, the equipment, the consumer equipment that's in a home is built without any concern for RF noise generation, and it becomes maddening to try and hear something when your noise level is S9 on HF. There are some things you can do with receive antennas. There's a great book, by the way, by Eric Nichols, Scale 7AJ, put out by RRL, called Receiving Antennas for the Radio Amateur. He's got some really good ideas on antennas you can use to help mitigate some of the noise, improve the signal-to-noise ratio on HF. So there's that to play with. But, sometimes you just kind of have to get away. And I think the soda guys probably have a very good thing there, because not only can they be heard from these perches, they also can hear very well because they're not near local noise sources.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing amateur radio now?
Frankly, most people would say, well, you have to attract more youth, but I think you got to start earlier than that. You have to basically spread the enthusiasm and the love of learning that goes with being a ham. If we can do that effectively, we will attract more youth, and we will encourage others who have a license but haven't done much to grow and develop themselves. And that's really what it's going to take to secure the future of amateur radio.
If you had to give advice to new or returning hams to the hobby, what advice would you give them?
Well, first, as we mentioned earlier, get involved in one or more clubs and local activities, whether it's your Aries group or a local radio club. By doing that, you're surrounding yourself with others who can help you and who share your interest. So that, to me, is probably the biggest single thing you can do. Second, I would say join ARRL to support what's really the strongest voice we have in advocating for amateur radio. And then finally, delve into some new areas of amateur radio. You're going to meet a whole new swath of hams, new friends. You're going to get a broader view of how all this stuff fits together, and hopefully find another wonderful rabbit hole to follow down. And if you keep doing this for the rest of your life, you're never going to die of boredom. I know I won't.
Well, I think that is amazing advice, and I would agree with all three of your points 100%. Marty, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. It's really been a great pleasure.
Eric, it's been delightful. Thank you for the chat.
73.
73.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Marty. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put an N6VI in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to Icom America for its support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of Icom America by clicking on their banner in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any other episode into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 400. QSO Today is now available in the iHeart Radio, Spotify, YouTube, and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use the Amazon Echo and say, Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who edits every single show and allows both this host and my guest to sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.